Time for what?
Experience in college.
Time for reinforcement.
Time for liftoff!
Where nothing is impossible unless you think it is impossible.
College.
I have my college scholarship.
Yes. Boom.
College ran by real fast.
You hung in with the best college.
First time for everything.
Well, what are you waiting for?
What are you waiting for?
Let's do this thing.
Genius, let's do this thing!
Welcome to the show, everyone. We're here with Jonathan Rice from the University of San Francisco. Yes, USF. Jonathan is here because he's an expert in admissions regarding nursing. University of San Francisco has one of the best nursing programs, but he's here to help all of you guys who are interested in becoming a nurse, regardless of what college or campus you're checking out. Jonathan, help us understand, why is there such a high demand for nurses? But at the same time, if I apply as a nursing major to a college, it's one of the most competitive majors, even more competitive than engineering.
Sure. I think that starts that there's a nursing shortage in this country. Across the United States, there's a great need for nurses. And there's a couple reasons you're seeing that. Part of that is the growing baby boomer population. As we have the baby boomers aging, there's more need for medical care. And so you have more and more folks going to the hospital, and they need folks in those positions to support them in that patient-centered way. So we're seeing that growth for nurses generally. At the same time, there is also somewhat of a shortage of space for clinicals across the country in nursing programs, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, that's leading to less space for nurses. And so there's both pieces are affecting where there's a need for nurses, but there's also a healthcare system that's really under struggle across the United States right now.
Can you tell us a story about why USF is so great in the nursing program?
So I was thinking about this earlier today. A student that and I did not work with the student directly actually, but I worked with their parents later on, and it was one of my favorite things. I work with transfer students as well here at the university, and I was down in Southern California doing a transfer fair. It was very, very slow. And so an older gentleman came up to my table, and often we get older students looking, and he wanted to chat with me, and that was fine. And very quickly I realized that he was not looking at the university, that actually he wanted to come over to thank us. And that's because his daughter had just graduated from the program, and her first job was at Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., which is one of the top pediatric facilities in the country. And he just talked about how there was such fear coming even from Southern California. She was first gen, moving to San Francisco, taking part in this program, but how transformative it was, and how not only just being in the program prepared her for nursing, obviously she got a great job right after, but how it prepared her to make that move, that independence of being in San Francisco, that when she got the offer to move to Washington, D.C., she was able to do it. So that was one of those stories to me of how the nurses make such an impact. I would also say, as someone who's had to go through the medical system here in San Francisco, quite a few of the nurses that my family members have interacted with, that I had to interact with, were USF alumni. And to me, that shows that our nurses are out there and they're practicing what they preach. And I had an experience where I was in the medical system and had a nurse that was taking care of me, and she was fantastic. At the end of it, I kind of asked her because I'm interested as an admission person, where did you go? And she said, I went to USF. And it was one of those moments like, wow, these students are doing exactly what they hope. These are these patient-centered people that truly care, not just about the science, but about making people comforted in moments that are the scariest that they face.
Now, I know some amazing nurses who went directly to a four-year university, and some went through community college.
Sure.
Some went to some other organizations as well. So what do you recommend if one wants to be a nurse? What pathway should they go through?
Sure. So generally, my belief is that we need to have as many pathways as possible to higher education. There is a stigma, I think, across the United States, if not in California, around going to community college. It is real college, and often it's the best pathway for students to take, that for various reasons, whether it's being closer to family, that's certainly a consideration for many students, whether it's financial. Lots of students decide to go to a community college first. And we believe as a university, it's our job to have different pathways available. Now, I will say when it comes to nursing, it's still incredibly competitive because of the reasons we've talked about, with clinical rotations and space in the hospitals for students to work. But we have, a number of students, I'd say probably about 100 every single year, who come to the university for the nursing program through a transfer pathway, either from another four-year institution or most frequently, from a community college here in California or around the country.
Now, Jonathan, I work with a lot of high school students, and there's a lot of amazing students who want to help others. And a lot of them want to be future nurses. And then I'll say, hey, do you love chemistry? Which is a big part of the curriculum in college. And they go, oh, heck no. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Sure.
You want to give me some shots and you don't know chemistry? What is the missing ingredients or the key ingredients students need to know in order to be a great nurse?
I think it actually starts not with an interest in science, although that will become important. It comes with an interest in compassion. You do have to have some interest in the medical field. That's certainly important. But the students who get called to nursing, I think, are the folks who love working with people. And so many of the students that I work with who end up going down that nursing path, it's often because they had an experience in a hospital or with a nurse where they saw what the person did and said, wow, I don't know much about this field, but I like the way that person made me feel in this really scary moment. So the students that I think should consider nursing, one, they want a pathway to be in the medical field, for sure. That's very important. But most important to me is they have a care for people, a deep love and compassion that they want to give back to others, because it is an unforgiving profession. It expects a lot of the folks who do it, but in people's biggest moments of need, nurses are there. Along with that, I do think there has to be some kind of science ability and love of STEM. And that's a combination. It can't just be one. I always say, if you just love the science, but you don't love people, you're not going to make a great nurse. So you need both. So I think, particularly if there's counselors out there, it's always who kind of guiding students. It's also, are there students who you see are really compassionate and really want to work with patients? I would also add here a question I get a lot is, why would a student become a nurse and not a doctor? Because there's a lot of families, particularly first-generation families, where there's pressure for the student to go into, they say medical, and they're really referring to MD or DO medical school. And that, again, comes back to what's pulling you into it. Are you really excited about the people or the science? And the nurses I work with love the people. And a question I often get from students is, how much time do I get to spend with patients? And if you're a nurse, that's what you do all the time. If you're a doctor, you don't always get the opportunity to work with those patients as directly. So those are some of the factors I look at when I'm trying to advise a student on whether or not they're thinking about nursing.
So please advise all our wonderful listeners who want to be a nurse.
Yep.
What are some courses, steps that they need to take in order to be a great nursing applicant?
Thinking from the University of San Francisco's perspective, and I certainly would say I can't speak for all nursing programs. Every school, it's one of the unique things about nursing, is going to look for slightly different things in their nurses. There are some consistencies. At USF, we need and require students to have taken chemistry in high school, as well as an additional lab science, at least one. My advice is that a nurse should really have taken, or prospective nursing student should have taken 4 years of science, with the particular emphasis on those lab sciences, because we need you to show that you can handle the science that's expected. Nursing curriculum, particularly a direct entry program like USF, which we can talk about in a second, that is an intense program. You're starting on your nursing coursework day one. In 4 years, you are a registered nurse. You have people's lives in your hands. You have to know the science behind all of this. And so the best preparation to start academically is going to be those STEM courses. Secondarily, beyond the science, 4 years of science and certainly math, would be volunteer experience. Now, in California, it can be really hard to get experience in a hospital. There are often wait lists for students to get internship experience or volunteer experience at hospitals. So I, perhaps to compare to some of my colleagues in admission, I'm not as stuck on the medical experience. I think that's ideal, but I also know that we realize the context of the reality that many students can't do that. And so for me, it's also, how can you demonstrate at least a commitment to serving others? So whether that's volunteering in an assisted living facility, maybe that's volunteering at a local community center or senior center, something where you can demonstrate working with vulnerable populations. To me, that's very demonstrative of your ability to serve as a nurse. So I think the more experience that you have working with various types of people, the more kind of volunteer experiences and variety of experiences, I think different cultures, different settings, that's the best. Another one I'd like to add, I really like to see nursing students, prospective nursing students who have taken quite a bit of foreign language. When it comes to healthcare system, and it's not less for admission, but really thinking about preparation for life, the nurses that have multiple languages are going to find so many more doors open to them, because part of living in a multicultural society is being able to work in different languages. And so for nursing students who have that ability, I'm not going to say it's going to be necessarily changing admission, but preparation isn't just about getting in, it's about supporting them through their experience. To me, that makes a huge difference if you can speak another language or you're on that path, because you can serve patients from a wider variety.
Jonathan, there's a lot of different degrees out there. There's a BSN. You could go straight to get an RN, even a community college. Help our students to understand the difference and which way is the best way for them for career opportunities as a nurse.
For me, of course, working at a four-year university, I think the BSN is the best. The Bachelor of Science in Nursing, I think, is an excellent option. First and foremost, because especially coming straight from high school, for those students, it is a four-year program that leads to that RN. Especially for a program like ours where it's direct entry, where you're starting your clinicals, you're guaranteed everything when you get in. It's a great pathway. I think the associate degree for nursing are also excellent options. I think those are a better option for students who are less sure about nursing as a career for life. Maybe they want to test the waters for two reasons. One, it's shorter. There's less of a commitment. But secondly, it would allow them to make a change later on after that associate's degree for a bachelor's degree. One other consideration, and I hate to bring it up, but I think it's a reality, is return on investment, return on your degree. And one reality is hospitals across the country, in many cases at this point, are now partly funded by the level of degree that their individual staff members hold. And so the higher your degree you hold, the more likely you are to get hired at many of these hospitals. So there are hospitals in clinical settings that are more attracted to hiring students with a BSN or eventually an MSN than an associate degree. And you see that reflected in the salaries as well. I think the average salary difference, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, there was about a $20,000 a year difference in students who have an associate degree in nursing versus the BSN. The BSN also prepares students to go on to get that master's degree, and that will allow them to really progress and grow in the field. So to summarize again, I think the community college is a good option if you're not as sure and you're not ready to commit as much. The BSN is great if you're ready to commit. And then I think there's a third option, which is the non-nursing bachelor's degree to MSN. And for a lot of the students I work with where they don't perhaps have the science preparation that we're looking for, that's a great option where you can go get a bachelor's degree in another field of interest. And then I know USF has a program like this. Many other campuses are adding this as well. Student can go on and get that master's in nursing. And it takes a little longer, but it gets you where you want to be. And also sometimes that's great, and that can add a different perspective. If you major in like a social science, you might have a different perspective on nursing than the student who's just been in nursing school. So there's a couple ways to get
So
there.
for campuses like yours that is test optional, how does admissions look at a student? Because one's ability to test well for the nursing exam
Sure.
is key in admissions.
Well, we at USF, as you notice, have gone test optional. And so if a student chooses not to submit the test scores, we're not going to look at them. We are going to look even more carefully at their grades. I think grades are always the best predictor of success in college, particularly in nursing. But as a profession and as admission generally, a lot of schools you'll find will be considering those test scores more heavily than perhaps for other majors. And most of that's because nursing's a test-heavy profession. Your entire life or livelihood as a nurse is frankly based on the ability for you to pass standardized tests. And that starts with the NCLEX, which is the national, I'm going to get I'm not going to say it. The acronym, I'm not going to get it today.
It's the test that does what?
It's the test that certifies you as a registered nurse. It is what allows you to practice. I always equate it to basically the board exam. If you don't pass that test, you cannot be a nurse. And so many of the schools out there are looking for that heavy science preparation, that math preparation, all of that, because ultimately, no matter if you get the degree, if you don't pass that test after graduation, you can't be a nurse. And so there are a lot of schools that think about how are you doing day to day in the courses you're taking, how are you doing in testing, because if you don't do well on that, you cannot be a nurse. And that is really where it comes from. The reason it's also such an intense course load, I think, is because it's such a quick process. I often say to my students, 4 years in the context of your life is not much time to go from really zero to being in a clinical setting. Again, I often say with patients' lives essentially in your hands, we want you to be as educated as possible. And that's why you have to understand not just the basics of the medicine, but the underlying structures. So that's why you see a heavy emphasis on the sciences going through within
Now,
nursing.
what is the one information that most high school students do not realize about becoming a nursing student in college?
If you're thinking about nursing as an undergraduate degree, you have to know that your college existence, your college life, is going to probably be significantly different from your peers. And that's something that students don't always think about. They think about the outcome and they're not thinking about the process to get there. So what is your social life going to be like? You are going to be taking a heavy math and science course load, medical course load. And additionally, starting in sophomore year, at least at USF, every semester you're going to be picking up more and more hours in the hospitals. And here at the University of San Francisco, our students are in hospitals all across the Bay Area, all the way as far as Palo Alto. That can be a significant amount of your time. You know, I think of one student I had here, and she asked for this, I will add, but her final semester, she did a precepture, which is kind of a more intense clinical experience, where she was one-on-one at St. Mary's on a graveyard shift 3 nights a week. And that was incredible. She wanted to be in that clinical environment, so that's what she was looking for after. But trying to manage spring of your senior year working a graveyard shift is very different from probably any other senior at the university or across the country.
And what is the minimum math level course a high school student or a community college student needs to take in order to become a nursing major?
I generally see pre-calc or higher. And that, again, is a bit dependent on the program. But pre-calc or higher, I would say switching out that pre-calc or calc for stats in your senior year, which is what I did, probably not what the nursing programs are going to be looking for.
Help parents, guardians, students, high school counselors to understand in the West Coast, in California specifically, to get into a direct admit nursing program is super competitive. Like, percentages of admissions is like even lower than getting into an Ivy League school. But in certain other parts of the country, it's so different. What's going on?
I think we have to start with the West Coast and the rest of the country, because the nuance to that is it's actually mostly competitive because we're out here on the West Coast here in California. So I did pull some numbers together because I love this. And I think this is kind of wild. So we talked earlier about how many students want to be nurses. There's nursing shortage. There's a need for nurses. So it would probably surprise any listeners out there that there are only 94 BSN programs on the western half of the United States. That might sound like a lot until I read you the rest. So in the South, there are 246 BSN programs. In the Midwest, there are 209 programs. And if in the North Atlantic, Mid-Atlantic, and the Northeast, there are another 147 programs. So part of it is purely a numbers game of there are so many students on the West Coast who are interested in nursing, as there are nationwide, but we have less availability. So it really is a supply-demand issue. So one of the things I often say is if a student really wants to be a nurse, they should look broadly. And I know that's a hard thing for Californians to hear because we love California and it's lovely and it can be hard to leave your family. But if or leave the sun. Yeah. But if you're willing to make that shift and look further, the likelihood of getting into a program goes up exponentially purely based on those numbers of programs. So I think that's another part of it. The other issue we see is purely based on clinical space. The reality is for a direct entry program like ours, where we're guaranteeing all of the clinical hours at USF, we guarantee students to do about 900 hours working in hospitals before they graduate. That requires a partnership with the hospitals. And they only have so much space in individual hospitals for the program. So I often say, the classes at USF are quite small. We could always probably fit more people into a classroom. The average class here is 22 students. For nursing, it's 30 to 40 students. It's still quite small. But we need space for them to be on the ground doing the work in a clinical setting. And that relies on outside factors that we can't control. And that's something that's true, I think, for not just our program, but for a lot of nursing programs across not just California, but the country.
I'm going to make it a little bit personal here. So what makes this job so hard for you when you're reading application after application? When someone says, hey, they want to be a nurse at your campus?
So I think the hardest thing for me is students who don't know what they're getting into. And that happens a lot. I think there are a lot of students out there, for better or worse, who want to be in medical. And they don't always be medical in what I would say the right reasons. I think a lot of people do look at salaries and say, nursing, that's 4 years and I can make a good salary. And I'm not saying that's a bad reason in our environment. Certainly you want to think about the economic return on your degree. But sometimes they don't know what that's going to take. And that's always a hard conversation to have. I've had so many students over the years who sit down and interview with me and they got that far and they've already applied. And I asked them how they did in chemistry and how that experience was. And they said, oh, I didn't take chemistry. My favorite one was I had a student who said, I really want to be a nurse, but I hate science. And I said, you do know what nursing is. And the student really didn't have a concept of what that was going to be like. So those are some of the hardest conversations. The other one that, maybe not a horror story, but is a real conversation, is talking about a student who is not at the academic level that a university is going to be looking for some of these programs. And I'll be just really frank, right? The average GPA for nursing at USF was upwards of a 3.9 last year. And I don't know if you hear my voice, I say it with a little trepidation because we're not in the business of trying to be a university that turns away a lot of students. We certainly want students who are qualified, but the reality is we have so many qualified students applying in such limited space that academically we need students who are going to be strong. And particularly when we're going back to this piece around passing the NCLEX and being able to get through 4 years of a rigorous curriculum, I'm all the believer of a holistic experience, but this is one of those things where your academic performance is indicative of what you need to do to get through a nursing program. And so we need students that strong. And sometimes you get students who just weren't there yet, and then it's about having a redirection conversation. Is there a non-nursing bachelor's to MSN program that would make sense? Is an associate degree program and transferring in when they can get those grades up a little bit more? But those are some of the hardest conversations to have.
A lot of times people think just in the medical field, there's just a nursing major or I'm going to go to graduate school for medical school. But there's a lot of different other occupations in the medical field. Can you share your knowledge and experience, what's out there?
The healthcare field is huge. And that's the first thing I would say. There are so many opportunities in health and growing opportunities, I would say, as our healthcare system continues to shift and evolve, whether that be in physician assistants, other clinical settings, clinical support, certainly down the line, the MD and DO route too. But the reality is one denial letter, it should not change a student's trajectory forever. It's just redirecting on a different path. And so sometimes that's doing a transfer into a program. Like USF, we have a transfer where we can pretty much forget what happened in high school and start over again and give students that opportunity after going to community college. There's the bachelor's to the non-nursing bachelor's to Master of Science in Nursing programs where a student can do something else and go in. So I often say it's never a reflection on the student's quality or of their person. These decisions are far too difficult to summarize to say it's a judgment on you. We're not reviewing a person, we're reviewing an application. And that's important to remember. And ultimately, it's about telling these students there's a way to get where you want to go. It just may not always be the path that you expected. And I think most colleges would be happy to support a student who reaches out to talk about those different pathways and how they can get where they want to go. Well, and another thing and I have to give all the credit to Angel Perez on this one, who is the VP at Trinity College in Connecticut. He gives a great presentation on the future of work. And one of the things that he often talks about with students is the reality that the majority of jobs that are going to exist in the future don't exist yet. And that's certainly true in the healthcare field. Being in the Bay Area, we see tons of technology companies that are working on robotics, on algorithms that are going to shift the way healthcare is delivered. And so I frequently also tell students what we're doing now in training our healthcare providers. The reality is for the students that are learning to be a nurse now or learning to be a doctor now, they are going to go through a period of retraining in 20 years because the system and the technologies that we use for healthcare will change as they have over the last 20 years, the 20 years before that. And so that ability to continuously learn and to accept that change will happen and to accept the need for redirection occasionally, it's actually a good thing.
Now, your campus is a direct admit nursing program. So what makes that so great compared to other pre-nursing programs?
Sure.
Jonathan, so explain to us a direct admit program for nursing.
So within our School of Nursing and Health Professions, which is what we call it at the University of San Francisco, for our undergraduate students, we offer a direct entry Bachelor of Science in Nursing program. So speaking to my high school students out there, this is a 4-year program. And what I like about it is I say it's direct entry, which means when you get in, you get in. So one thing we didn't talk about as much today is there are some programs that are not direct entry, where your first 2 years, you are doing what we call pre-nursing. And then essentially you have to apply into your nursing program again as a sophomore in college to continue. And that can be a very stressful experience. At USF, at our program, when a student gets admitted, they're in. We enroll 120 new freshman nurses, first year nurses every year. We fully intend to graduate 120 4 years later. So I think what you find in our program is a sense of a real cohort. The students that get into this program, it's competitive, but once they get there, it's not about the competition anymore. It's about supporting their fellow nurses, nursing students, to get where they want to go. And that's one of the things I love about our program. When students are in it, there's a real sense of not how we can compete with each other, but how can we work together to reach our collective goal of becoming a registered nurse. The second thing is we guarantee all the clinicals, and to me that's important. Nurses want to do this, that most students I work with want to be a nurse because they want to be in a clinical setting. We guarantee those 900 hours working in hospitals and the simulation labs across the Bay Area. And so they get to rotate through a variety of different clinical settings while they're here. So whether that's pediatrics, whether that's, again, that graveyard shift in an ER, they get to see all those different things that they can do here. The last thing I would add, and the reason I love USF, the reason I kind of champion these programs, is that we're a Jesuit Catholic institution. And the way that we approach nursing is a little bit different. Within Jesuit education, there's a phrase, which you'll know really well, cura personalis, care for the whole person. The very first class that every single nursing student takes at USF is called Nursing in the Jesuit Tradition. And one thing I should add that's interesting, we're not a majority Catholic institution, we're about 28% Catholic. So that class is not so much a theological pushing one view, but it's helping our students approach nursing as you're not just treating the ailment, you're treating the person's mind, you're treating everything around them, you're treating their family in some ways, that you have to look at your patients as whole people and all the experiences they bring with them into that clinical setting, not just the sickness or the issue that's affecting them, the ailment that's affecting them at that time. So I love the way that we create these whole person, patient-centered nurses. I think that also helps that they still have to complete a core curriculum here. So they're still taking liberal arts courses, they're still taking arts and history and social science and these other things that give them other perspectives that they can bring to the classroom and ultimately bring to the profession later on. So those are a couple things that stand out to me. And then, as you said, our nurses have been really successful afterwards. And that's also a wonderful testament to see that the education you're providing is working. And I think part of that really comes from the strength of being in the Bay Area. This is such a diverse region, such a region with so many different cultures and people, and that gets reflected not just in the students we enroll, but the people that they interact with in those clinical settings, the variety of people that they get to work with when they're out in the field. And so when they do that interview and they talk about the different experiences they've had a variety. It's not just a one-size-fits-all approach.
And any other last words of wisdom, Jonathan?
Sure. I think one is once you start looking at programs, remember that part of it is the program, part of it is the fit for the university. You want to find that community that's going to be a good fit for you, that's going to have the social environment that's going to support you, the residential environment that's going to support you, because it's a really intense couple years. And I guess I'd add, I can't believe I'm saying this because you're in California, but I would really encourage students to think broadly and look nationwide, and that if this goal is really what you want, obviously I'd love to have you apply to USF, but I want you to get where you want to be, and that might involve leaving, and a couple years away from home could really only strengthen you in the long term. And I just encourage students to think about taking that leap and looking and applying broadly when it comes to nursing programs.
Jonathan, I love doing shows with you, and your presentation where students are always great. You're very upfront for all your useful information, and the University of San Francisco to allowing us to record this show on your gorgeous campus on top of the hill in Lone Mountain. For everyone else, for more shows like this, please subscribe. And until next time. Thank you for listening to our podcast. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your precious day to listen to us. So subscribe so that you could download this podcast wherever you may be. We're on so many different streaming devices, but also you can find out more information about College for All at college4all.com. We're also on Twitter at collegeforall.amv, Instagram collegeforall.amv, and more to come. Thank you and have an amazing day.